Dr. Paul Levinson is a frequent guest here on Hot Media with Bob Mann, and we talk about a wide variety of subjects. Dr. Levinson is professor of communication and media studies at my alma mater, Fordham University in New York City. He's a smart guy and a funny guy. Well, smart and funny put together, that is something where you get satire. Satire is essential. It's more than just a spoof. That's not what it is. And in the presidential election year like 2024, we need it more than ever. But there are issues, including what we're talking about the most here on this episode, which is an idea of both sidesism. Paul, very nice to have you back here on the podcast because of the fact that being monthly, I don't get a chance to talk to you quite as much as I did in the past.
Yeah, my hair got even a tiny bit more gray just in the period of time that haven't been together on the podcast.
Well, people can go on YouTube and they can do a comparison and,
Right.
freeze frame it and see how they do. Let's just talk about Jon Stewart right off the bat. I was thrilled to see that Jon Stewart was coming back to The Daily Show, even if it's only once a week. But he got mixed reviews that first time out. And this is what I'm going to title this episode, Bothsidesism. Journalism has to have both sides, although, as Murrow said, I can't imagine that every story has two equal sides to it. But satire, I didn't think had to have two sides to it. Let's talk a little bit about Jon Stewart and what happened in terms of his focusing much more on Joe Biden in his first episode than he did on Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, listen, the problem with any kind of satire, but even especially Jon Stewart, is it is also a way of conveying news. And one of the things that made what Jon Stewart used to do and started up on the comedy channel was really becoming a source of news for a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people. Now, I don't know. I haven't really seen the ratings. I don't know if that's the case so far. But I remember, 10, 15 years ago, noting with, mixed feelings because it is comedy that this was a main source of news. And I think, unfortunately, and I don't know Jon Stewart from Adam, but to some extent it went to his head, and he's not really sure or comfortable if he is a comedian or a journalist. And unfortunately, journalism does have this, I think, wrong point of view that you have to give equal time to both sides. You and I well know this goes back to the fairness doctrine, which I always thought was a rather dumb doctrine. Are you going to be fair to Adolf Hitler? If you're you're doing a story on the Holocaust, I mean, the only way of being fair to someone like that is to tell the truth, because you need to be fair to the world. And I think that Jon Stewart, I was very disappointed in his first comeback appearance. Just like you, I was delighted. Trevor Noah was good, but look, Jon Stewart has a unique voice. He still has a unique voice, and there was both sidisms, not only between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And by the way, that's an issue we can talk about anyway. The only thing these two men have in common is that they're both old, but I'm not going to complain about that because I'm right up there somewhere in that area too. And as far as I can tell, maybe you or your listeners can correct me. I think I have most of my mental faculties. In some
I,
ways,
I think all your marbles are still there. I really do. It could just be that from someone who's almost your age, that might not be a fair comparison. But here's the thing that got to me was Jon Stewart defended himself in that first episode. He goes, people may say that we should just give scrutiny to Donald Trump, but we need to give scrutiny to the person running against him. Yes, that kind of scrutiny, but when the whole idea is simply that he's old and bumbling, you've got a lot more on the other side with Trump. I mean, old and bumbling did not try to overthrow the Capitol in an election. It does not seem to be an equal plane.
No, and actually, there was an unfortunate coincidence. Ezra Klein, a pretty well-known podcaster, he has a podcast. He writes op-eds that are published regularly in the New York Times. Came out with this heart-rending. He's searching his soul. He can no longer support Joe Biden for president. Biden should step aside as the hero that he is, and somehow throw the mantle to a younger person. And to some extent, it was the coincidence of those two things, although Jon Stewart is vastly more important than Ezra Klein. But Ezra Klein, has a voice that people listen to. And, it certainly touched a raw nerve with me, because I think this upcoming election, and there's nothing the least bit funny about this, and, every election is important. But if Donald Trump gets back in the White House, God help our democracy. He's seen the signs. We've seen the signs. He tells us what he's going to do, and we're really already, to the extent that Trump has such a big audience, on a path to fascism. And the only way to turn around is to once and for all decisively beat him. He's going to claim that he won the election if he gets like 2% of the vote and Biden gets 98% of the vote. You can rest assured Trump will come up with some conspiracy theory and his followers will eat that up. But we at least have to do that. The truth and reality needs to see Donald Trump defeated at the ballot box. So it's that important. And therefore, this is not a time for, hey, well, we're going to criticize Trump, but we're going to criticize Biden. Not that Biden should be above criticism, but if the criticism is he's 80 years old, that's not much of a criticism. And the truth of the matter is, I know people who are half that age who have half of Biden's perception and commitment to doing the best thing that he possibly can for the United States and the world.
Let's talk a little bit about other types of satire in an election year. Someone pointed out to me once that Lorne Michaels bears a little bit of responsibility, the great, legendary producer and creator of Saturday Night Live, by having had Donald Trump as a guest host, that it actually could humanize him to such a degree. Do you think that Over the Top, although I think James James Austin Johnson, who does Trump on SNL, does him to a T. But do you think that just general impersonations of Trump can actually humanize him, or do they make him seem foolish and without credibility? What do you think of just continued? Yes, it's making fun of him, but is it possibly just saying, come on, we just, poke fun at everybody?
That's a really tough question. And let me just say, I don't think that Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler. I don't even think Vladimir Putin is Adolf Hitler. I think there's a continuum. At the far worst, horrendous end of that continuum is Adolf Hitler. Putin is somewhere, on the way, but he hasn't done as much horrendous damage as Hitler did. And not that I'm trying to be fair to Trump, but yeah, Trump does quote knowingly or unknowingly from Mein Kampf. He uses the Nazi handbook without realizing it, maybe, or maybe he does realize it. But Trump is not as bad as Vladimir Putin. So would I like to see Saturday Night Live, or if it existed and was a radio show in the 1930s, in effect, make fun of the Fuhrer? And there were actually all kinds of skits that were going on in the 1930s. There was some sort of song, "Der Fuhrer's Face" or something, and it was basically making fun of Hitler, all kinds of things. And of course, Charlie Chaplin, in effect, played a Hitler-like character. And in retrospect, I think we could say, hey, those things didn't help any. They should have been just nothing but worldwide condemnation when it was clear what Hitler was beginning to do in the 1930s. But Trump is not Hitler. He's not that bad. And so, can we justify, in effect, extending the umbrella of satire on Saturday Night Live to Trump? And I would say at this point, as bad as Trump is, we do and can benefit from the satire of Trump on Saturday Night Live. It's important for us never to lose our sense of humor. And even though I am doing everything in my power as a professor and a writer to what little that can do to make sure Trump is not brought back to the White House, ruling out comedy and satire, I think, is going too far, because we do need to be able to laugh at things, even evil, horrible things.
Yeah, and it is a very important point for anyone who rightly fears a Trump administration, that there's a big difference between complete command, the end of democracy, and the Holocaust, or something of that nature. And that's important to put that in that perspective. But let's just talk a little bit about the origins of satire and how sometimes now, because of the fact that society is so sensitive, that even something like a very old, hundreds-year-old piece of satire, such as A Modest Proposal, today might get people saying, "Oh my God, it was horrible. He was suggesting that they actually eat children," when it's, well, literally, yeah, but not in terms of the spirit and the true meaning. Are we getting to the point where sizzling satire is going to be held back by the very people who might benefit from sizzling satire?
Yes, I do think we're going a little bit too far in that direction. And this fits into another discussion, which I'm sure we probably had at least some point in the last couple of years, the damage that cancel culture has been doing to our society and therefore our well-being, where you can't make a joke without worrying that there's going to be a torrent of criticism of you. And I remember what happened to Kathy Griffith a couple of years ago, I guess more than a couple of years ago, going on 7 or 8 years ago, where she held up Trump's head as if it had been cut off. It was part of a comedy routine that she was doing. It wasn't a subtle satire, to say the least. I didn't particularly find that funny, but that unleashed a torrent of criticism. CNN basically fired her from their New Year's Eve celebrations, leaving poor Anderson Cooper not alone, but with whatever the guy's name is, Andy Cohen,
Andy
who,
Cohen,
yeah, I mean, Andy Cohen is okay, but he wasn't, he's not exactly a comedian. So, it basically pretty much ruined that New Year's Eve show. So I think that, yes, that you raise a very, very good point. I think we are too cautious about saying the wrong thing. And look, you and I are both, professors, and I know that it's always in my mind, and I'm sure it's in your mind too. It's not quite the way it used to be when you're talking to a class. I mean, I'm the kind of person, my students would recognize what I'm saying to you now in our conversation, where I feel comfortable about saying anything, because that's the way I am in class. But I'm always in the back of my head in class, I know that I have to be careful. It's not the time to make a joke that could in any way be misunderstood and found to be in any way making a student uncomfortable. And but that's the classroom, and that's okay. Students are paying tuition to be there. But when comedians have to feel that way in the world at large, that is a problem. And look, comedy, laughter is one of the saving graces of human beings. It's good for the heart. It's good for the soul. It's good for your health. It's good for your blood pressure. It's a way of human beings connecting. And as far as I can tell, dogs are wonderful. They don't particularly have a sense of humor, right? I know goldfish certainly don't. And forget about cats. So, we're unique. We have a sense of humor, and I think that needs to be protected and nurtured, not constantly put in a position where, hey, maybe I shouldn't say that thing. Maybe that goes too far.
Before we go on to other things, because I understand, since I haven't spoken to you in a couple of months now, that you've been on to many successful ventures. But who's your favorite satirist? Is that too tough a question? Like, who's your favorite of all time? Whether it's an author, a comedian, a producer,
Okay,
who might it
yeah. All right, I'm sure we'll get a torrent of criticism. It has to be Jackie Mason. I loved Jackie Mason, and I began. First of all, you can see many of his skits on YouTube, but I really began paying attention to Jackie Mason when he was on the Ed Sullivan Show many times, and apparently one of the times he was going on a little bit too long in his skit, and Ed Sullivan, was like on the side, and he held up like a finger to show you only have like a minute or a second left, and Jackie Mason, took a little offense to that, and he went into one of his routines. Oh, I'm getting a finger from Ed Sullivan. You're giving me a finger. I'll give you a finger. And
And it's live on network television without a delay. Yeah. I'll give you
exactly.
mine because we have to go to other things. But Mel Brooks, I think that Mel Brooks, as a performer, as a writer, and a producer, what are your thoughts on Mel?
Oh, I think he's great. I love Mel Brooks, and I love the Reiner family. All of those people were absolutely hilarious, and of course, when you talk about Mel Brooks, you have to go into movies. That's a unique form of satire, also. Most of the time we think of satire, we think of somebody standing up. By the way, Lenny Bruce, also a brilliant satirist. Standing up. Doing a little skit in a club or before a live audience. But movies as satire is something that's important too to the whole comedy scene. And by the way, let me say, Curb Your Enthusiasm, which once again is in its last season, is absolutely hilarious. And I'm hoping that we'll find out, hey, Larry's going to do another season, because he is unique. Everything that people think, he's sitting at a restaurant and the kind of service you're getting, everyone has those thoughts, but Larry puts it out there on the screen, and it's hilarious.
Pretty good. Uh, anyway, listen, before we run completely out of time, you told me as we were preparing to record that a lot of projects you've been working on have come to fruition and things are going well. So give us a quick list.
Yeah, well, back in 2022, I had a short story published. It's real life. I think we've talked about it. It's an alternate history in which we see Pete Fornatel, a real disc jockey at WFUV at Fordham University, who tragically passed away too soon back in 2012. But in 1996, we see him in an alternate world in which John Lennon was never assassinated, the Beatles never broke up. The short story received a lot of good attention. There was a radio play made of that in which I actually played the part of Pete Fornatel. We at least both had a pretty good Bronx accent, as your listeners can tell. Anyway, I expanded the short story into a novel. It was published a couple of weeks ago, and it's beginning to get some great response. And there's going to be a launch event at the Players Club. This is in Gramercy Park. I mean, this is a wild, crazy place. I love it. They actually have John Keats' death mask, which, if your listeners don't know, I mean, when I guess in the 19th century, when someone died, they would like make an impression of the person's face, and then they would like sort of create like a little statue out of it. And so it's almost like John Keats, the great Victorian romantic poet, is there. He'll be attending my event. So admission is free. It's at the Players Club in New York City. It's on 23rd Street. And I would be delighted to meet any of our listeners. and I'll be doing a reading from the novel, and I'll be doing a signing of the book. So, apropos of what we've been talking about, satire, the Players Club also has hosted many a satirist over the decades.
Well, I got to look at my calendar here because this sounds like something fun and exciting. And I hope Keats likes the show too. I hope that all works out for you. Well, it's just great to see you again and to talk to you. And you're always somebody I can count on. And let's see what happens as we talk between now and November. I don't know what impact the media, whether the serious journalistic news media or social satire, will have an impact at all, or if people's minds are already made up and it just comes down to who's going to show up at the polls. But it is going to be interesting, let's put it that way. But interesting is not always enjoyable.
Yeah, well, let's hope for the best. We'll certainly hope to do a podcast sometime around then. Either we'll be celebrating or we'll be both packing to go to Canada.
Well, I'll leave you with this. John Oliver, who I think is a phenomenal satirist and really bridges that gap and crosses over to journalism, and Stephen Colbert, we're going to do a show at NJ PAC, New Jersey PAC in Newark, the day after the election, thinking it would be fun to talk about, because they didn't think in a million years that Trump was actually going to win. And then this is the night after he's won. And it turned from a party into a wake really, really fast. People were just kind of sitting there with their mouths open because it just was a very different reaction. So we'll see if they're maybe not going to book that same thing this particular year. So anyway,
Yeah,
Paul, go ahead.
I was going to say they won't make the same mistake twice, but hopefully that won't even be a possibility.
Paul Levinson, my guest right here on Hot Media. Paul, just hang on after I stop recording, and I'll talk to you for one quick second. And for those of you watching on YouTube, we have these interviews posted raw, but if you go on Spotify or Apple Podcast or anywhere you get your podcast, the audio version is edited with other elements. So please be checking out Hot Media with Bob Mann.